There, now I'm recording. Gospel of John is the fourth of four Gospels. We've mentioned before that there are four Gospels for a reason. Each Gospel is coming from a slightly different point of view. Every Gospel has apostolic authority. The church was planted by the apostles, not directly by Jesus himself, but by the apostles who were given the authority to produce the New Testament, the inerrant words of God, and to do the signs and wonders of the apostles. The apostles could do miracles almost on the same level as Jesus could. So they were given a great deal of his authority. That gradually died out as the New Testament was completed and as the church was planted. And by the end of the age of the apostles, the miracles had stopped, but the New Testament was fully distributed around the Mediterranean world. John is the last of the apostles to die. We know that he died in exile on the island of Patmos. He probably wrote all of his stuff from Patmos. So John wrote the Gospel, the Book of Revelation, and the letters. So John has a significant part of the New Testament. He's a pretty important character. Let's share the screen and we'll get into the notes. I sent out some notes. I hope everybody that wants them has notes. If you're having trouble getting those notes, drop me a Facebook message and I will make sure that you get notes in return. Let's see here. And this is the one I want. My goodness, I've got some stuff that's a total mess. Okay, there it is. We're up. Okay, the Gospel of John, written by somebody who may have looked something like this. Okay, this is from the 4th century. It's in Italy, and you know, how did they know what John looked like? We didn't have photographs or oil paintings, so this is somebody's guess. His nose is a little long for a Palestinian Jew. He looks more like an Italian, but that's all right. That's all right. This is supposed to be John. The Gospel of John has as its primary point the idea that Jesus is the Son of God. Other Gospels are making other points, and we've talked about those. The Gospel of John has as its primary point the idea that Jesus is the Son of God. When we're looking for a place in the New Testament that teaches that Jesus is God, the Gospel of John is the place. I mean, this is where we go to, and it is also for this reason that the critics of Christianity have often chosen to attack the Gospel of John. Because if we can make the Gospel of John go away, then all of a sudden they think it's easier to make the argument that Jesus really wasn't the Son of God. It's not. It's simply that John emphasizes this. And he does so in such a way as to tie the entire biblical revelation together. John is in many ways a theologian. He's not a historian like Luke, in that he really doesn't care about the historical flow of things. So we're going to miss lots and lots of stuff in John that is in the other Gospels. John is like 93% unique material. But John is telling an essentially theological story that Jesus is God. He is the creator God. He is the king. He is the redeemer. He is fully human as well. So God became flesh. And here is the Gospel of John. So very high marks here in the Gospel of John. We're going to see if I can find my cursor. There we go. The key idea in the book of John is expressed in the very first verse. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. In the beginning, so which reminds everybody, particularly the Jews who first read this, but everybody would have recognized this as the beginning line of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Here, in the beginning was the Word. We'll spend just a moment with this verse. I'm going to come back to it when we get into the first chapter of John. But the verb here, the action word, is was. The verb to be in the imperfect tense. Imperfect means unfinished action. So at a point in time that we can call the beginning, the Word already was, had been since eternity past, and continued to be. So the very first statement of the Gospel of John is of the eternal existence of the Word. Greek is logos. Logos is simply the Greek word that we translate word, or sometimes reason or logic. The Stoics and other Greek philosophers used the term logos to speak of a set of principles that stood at the foundation of all of nature. And that really isn't too far off. Jesus is so much more than that. But it's interesting that the philosophers use this term in ways that are not all that different from the way John is using it. That, by the way, does not make John a Stoic philosopher. It means that the Stoic philosophers weren't totally stupid. That's all that we can really say there. In the beginning was the Word. Notice that Jesus is called the Word. We use words for communication. The term also means logic or reason. And so Jesus is a reasonable or logical communication from God. He is not a mystical feeling. He is not a spiritual but not practical reality. Jesus is a perfectly reasonable, perfectly logical, content-filled communication from God. He is the Word. And then we're told the Word was with God. The term with there means face to face. So the Word throughout all of eternity was face to face with God the Father. The term God here has to refer to God the Father, because the next phrase makes it explicit, and the Word was God. So the Word and God in the second phrase refer to two different persons. In the third phrase, one Godhead. The Word was God. And the grammar there tells us that there is an equality between the Word and God. When you have seen the Word, you have seen God. It's what we call a copula in grammar. This is that. Sunday is the Lord's Day. Oh, okay. Well, that's what day it is. The Word was God. So this beginning is both simple and profound. This is an idea that is going to continue all the way through the Gospel of John. We're going to see the deity of Christ demonstrated by his ministry, by his signs and wonders, and most explicitly by his direct teaching. So let's talk briefly about the authorship of the book, the internal and external evidence, which is what we look at when we're trying to figure out who wrote a book. Technically, the Gospel of John is anonymous. That is, it doesn't start out by saying, "Hi, my name is John, and I'm writing this gospel." None of the Gospels do. Our knowledge of the authorship of these Gospels comes from internal evidence in the book. What does this author know that is unique to him that gives us a clue as to who it might have been? And so the Gospel of Luke is obviously written by Luke. It was written by the same person who wrote Acts, and somebody close to Paul, somebody with a historical bent. There's all kinds of stuff, and so it becomes obvious that this has got to be Luke. The external evidence is the early church tradition. The internal evidence in the Gospel of John is that John is an eyewitness to the events of the life of Christ. He is obviously there, much like Matthew. Matthew was obviously there, but Matthew had a different point of view. Mark, of course, writes Peter's eyewitness account. Luke was not an eyewitness, but he spoke with eyewitnesses. John, on the other hand, was in the inner circle. Peter, James, and John are the three who are mentioned together as the core group of the apostolic band. And it just about has to be an eyewitness, part of the inner circle. And he is also he calls himself the disciple that Jesus loved. And that's one of my favorite titles for John, because John always writes that as though he's a little bit amazed that Jesus would love him. It's just kind of fun that way. The early church testified that John was the author of the epistle. From the very earliest times, the universal testimony of the church fathers and the various writers suggest that John, the apostle, wrote the Gospel of John. His authorship has never been questioned until relatively modern times. In the 19th century, the German Tübingen school was enthusiastically looking for ways to undercut the authority of the Bible. And they noticed that a 3rd century author by the name of Papias spoke of the author of this gospel as the elder John. I've forgotten which Tübingen scholar picked up on that, but the conclusion was, the guy spent half of his commentary on John developing this thesis, that the Gospel of John was not written by the Apostle John, but by somebody else of whom we know absolutely nothing, called John the Elder. who didn't live in the 1st century at the time of Christ, but toward the end of the 2nd or into the 3rd century, sometime in the 200s. And he was actually writing a view that was popular in Greek philosophy at the time. Now, that's a silly extrapolation from the writings of Papias. John was obviously an old man when he wrote the gospel. So there's not a reason in the world that he couldn't be called John the Elder. He was not only old, but he was also an elder of the church in Ephesus. So why wouldn't you call him John the Elder? It makes good sense. The other thing is that modern critics are so busy finding reasons not to trust the Bible that they rarely bother reading it. If you read the critical commentaries on the Gospel of John, you'll come away really disappointed. I mean, here are a bunch of authors who are always learning but never coming to a knowledge of the truth. They just never quite figure it out. We're quite sure that John the Apostle wrote this book. He most likely wrote it from Ephesus or from Patmos. The location of the writing was close to here. This photograph is taken in Ephesus. And that's not me. That's one of the guys in my group. And this is the Church of St. John outside the old city of Ephesus. And as it happens, right across the street from the rug factory that our Sezgin Hotel tour guide wanted us to stop in. Turkey is an interesting place to visit, or was 20 years ago. It has become less and less friendly to tourists, but tourists are still important, and Ephesus is a big attraction for tourists. I'll show you some pictures from Ephesus sooner or later during this New Testament survey. John came to Ephesus shortly after Paul had been there, and of course after Timothy. Paul planted the church. Timothy was the first pastor there. We'll see the letter to Timothy a little later on. When Timothy moved on, John apparently came to Ephesus, and interestingly, he had been taking care of Mary, the mother of Jesus. And so Mary moved to Ephesus with John, and that's where John ministered all of his life. Toward the end of his life, between about 85 and 95 AD, John was exiled to an island off the coast of Turkey named Patmos. From the Turkish mainland port of Ephesus, which is Kusadasi today, you take a ferry boat, little Turkish ferry, out to Samos Island, and from Samos, you take a fast boat over to Patmos. It takes about 40 minutes. And from Patmos, it's possible on a clear day to see the coast of Turkey off in the distance. So John would have been exiled on this essentially tiny desert island for 10 years, last 10 years of his life. We know that the gospel, John's letters, and the book of Revelation were written from Patmos. The book of Revelation certainly was written from Patmos because it says so. I was on the island of Patmos doing this, that, and the other thing. So we know that that's where Revelation was written. Revelation is clearly written after the time of the Gospel of John. And the letters are written at various times along the way to the church in Asia Minor. The gospel was published first in Ephesus. Ephesus was a very, very important church. in these early centuries, and continued to be a very important church with a relatively large population, well into the first millennium. The city of Ephesus slowly died out. Well, the Arab conquest of Asia Minor in the 9th century led to the slow disintegration of Ephesus. The library in Ephesus was finally destroyed in the 8th century. Again, we're not sure if it was the Muslims who destroyed the library or if it was just a slow deterioration of the city, but the Ephesus slowly declined, and its port slowly silted up and became useless. So Ephesus is a very interesting place. People just moved away from Ephesus. And when we go back to Ephesus today, we find essentially the city of the roughly 4th or 5th century AD, with lots and lots of things that date back to the time of Paul and Timothy and John. It's very interesting to visit. Okay, purpose and theme of the book of John, actually given to us in the gospel itself in chapter 20, verse 31. John says, leading up to that, he says, surely if everything that Jesus began to do and to say were written in a book, even the world itself couldn't contain everything that would be written. But these are written. So John is obviously being selective. He has chosen a batch of the sayings and actions of Christ so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. John records the evidence, the signs and teachings of the deity of Christ. John is preeminently concerned with demonstrating that Jesus is the Son of God. So some think there may be some other purposes as well. And I agree, almost no biblical book has a single purpose out by itself. John may have been arguing against the Gnostics. It's possible, but the Gnostics really weren't a big deal until the 2nd century. But he uses some language that can easily be used if you're fighting against the Gnostics. Perhaps there was a dispute with the synagogue in Ephesus. It's entirely possible. And of course, lots of commentaries that I've read say the purpose of the Gospel of John is to do evangelism. And, well, frankly, the word gospel is euangelion, evangelism. So the Gospels are essentially evangelistic. The purpose of a gospel is to preach the gospel. At any rate, so I consider that just it's a restatement of the same thing. Tautology is what we call that. Okay, so that's the purpose of the Gospels. That's fine. Clearly, John intended to provide a clear and pointed demonstration that Jesus, who is the Son of God, took on actual flesh and lived among men. The idea of the incarnation is very, very important in John. We're going to see that over and over and over again. The critics have dismissed John. The modern critics are saying, well, John can't possibly be historically accurate because it's a story about a man who is the Son of God. Ha, ha, ha. And everybody knows that men aren't gods. Ha, ha, ha. You Christians believe such crazy stuff. The point of the Gospel of John is that Jesus, who is from all eternity past the Son of God, took on flesh and became entirely man as well. That's the point of it. The historicity of the incarnation, which is a word that we give to the event of God taking on flesh, is, for my money, the chief glory of the fourth gospel. In the fourth gospel, we see the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, glory as of the only begotten of the Father. How much clearer could John be? He's just laying it out. Now, something that's interesting, if this were written in the 3rd century by somebody we know nothing else about, called John the Elder, some early church father of whom nothing is known, by the 3rd century, there was a significant argument about who Jesus was and how he was related to the Father. If, in fact, this dates to that much later time, it would not be as clear. It would not be, the language would not be as precise. There would be significant evidence in the text itself that it was a 2nd or 3rd century document. So I'm sorry. I've been reading too many critical commentaries getting ready for this series of lectures, and frankly, I'm getting a little tired of them. These guys should spend more time reading the Gospel of John and less time criticizing it. So anyway, there it is. What else do we know? We know that John was a part of the apostolic leadership in Jerusalem. He, with Peter and James, were at the center of the apostolic preaching of the life of Christ. His gospel is designed to supplement what was already out there in the other gospels. So I've mentioned his material is 93% unique to his gospel. Even at that, he claims to have included only a little bit, a tiny part of what could have been included. There's some things that are distinctive in John. Let's look at 2 charts, and we'll go through all of this when we get to them in the gospel itself. But the 7 signs and then the 7 I ams in the Gospel of John. So the 7 signs in the Gospel of John that are the 7 key miracles. Changing water into wine at Cana, the healing of an official's son, healing of the invalid at the pool of Bethesda, the feeding of 5,000, walking on water, healing a blind man in Jerusalem, and then finally raising Lazarus from the dead. Those 7 miracles are each put into a context, almost always in some kind of a conflict with the Jews, and are usually connected with a theological discourse from Jesus as he explains what he's doing, why he's doing it. So each of them sits in its own setting, there's like 7 rare jewels surrounded by a setting of gold. And John isn't trying to overwhelm us with miracles. Like he says, if all of them were written down, surely there aren't enough books. But he's picking out 7 that are for him the keys. The I ams are also famous. There are 7 I ams: bread of life, light of the world, gate of the sheep, good shepherd, resurrection and life, the way, the truth, and the life, and the true vine. Each of these is interesting because of the use of the term I am. The term I am is a translation of the Old Testament name of God, Yahweh. When when Moses asked God, what's your name? God said, I am that I am. Tell them I am sent you. The name is changed somewhat to the Hebrew word Yahweh, which is He who is. In the New Testament, Jesus, instead of he could have said all of these things in a different way, but he chooses I am the bread of life. Later on, there's an eighth one that I think is just as important. It says, before Abraham was, I am. I think I think this is J. Vernon McGee's list of sevens. And there are actually more than 7 miracles, and there are more than 7 I ams, but these are the key 7. Okay. Jesus is identifying himself with with God. Okay, the key verb in the Gospel of John is believe. Interesting. John uses the word believe more than any of the other gospel, a total of 98 times. And he doesn't use the word faith at all, which is fascinating. The noun doesn't occur. Faith is, for John, faith or belief is always active. It is something to do. It is ongoing, growing, and interactive. The book can be divided roughly into 4. Let's see here what I'm looking at here. Into 4 parts. There's a theological prologue, which is what we'll be attacking today as we go into the first 18 verses. There is a book of signs from chapter 119 all the way through chapter 12. From the end of chapter 12 to about chapter 19 is the major public response of the crowds and of the Jewish leaders that lead up to the crucifixion. And then as we get down to the end of the book, Jesus' teaching all during this time, especially 13 through 17, leads up to the church age, the crucifixion, then the church age, and the age that will follow that. So John has a very, very big palette here. There's an awful lot going on. Let's launch into the book itself. This is good stuff. The first 18 verses can be divided up kind of like this. The Logos in time and eternity is first 5 verses, and we'll spend probably the rest of today just looking at that passage. Verses 6 through 8, the witness of John the Baptist. 9 through 13, the emphasis on light. And then the concept of the incarnation as revelation in 14 through 18. And it will take us the rest of today, at least, to get through this little bit. Let's start off with the Logos in eternity, in the beginning. When there was nothing at all, was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. The capacity for communication is what is embodied in this term logos, and not nonsense communication, but rational communication, communication of good information. When we see Christ, we're experiencing him as good communication. We see him as he is. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. There are cults out there. Heretics of all sorts are out and about in the world. In this country, we have a group called the Jehovah's Witnesses, very similar to Iglesia Ni Cristo in the Philippines. But they would translate this first chapter as in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. Okay, so they add the article a, as though there are lots of gods and Jesus is one of them. Jehovah's Witnesses in general are not, what's a nice way to say this? I have some friends who are Jehovah's Witnesses, but let's just say that uh, Jehovah's Witnesses are not the most sophisticated theologians in the stack. They're not very bright. They want to claim that there is one God, and yet Jesus was a God. Well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean much of anything. And it is not a helpful translation. Greek scholars tell us that this sentence has to be translated, and the Word was God, because it has no article. And therefore, it is speaking of the quality, or literally the equality of Jesus with God Himself. He was, verse 2, in the beginning with God. So there we go, the eternality of Christ. He was there with God, face to face with God, enjoying fellowship with God at the moment of the beginning. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Now, this is a new piece of evidence. The Old Testament simply says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, here we discover that God the Father and God the Son are face to face with one another, in perfect fellowship with one another through all of eternity, until that moment in time where the creation happened. And as the creation was happening, Jesus, the Son, was with God, and all things were made through him. He is the agent of creation. Without him was not anything made that was made. Jesus is the agent of creation itself. And again, I'm going to put an emphasis on this point. The biblical concept of creation is not mythical. It is not mystic. It is not a spiritual truth that has no historical basis. The creation is a historical fact that God, at a point in time, made everything that is. Prior to that moment in time, there was nothing at all, and God created out of nothing. What John adds to our knowledge here is that Jesus is the responsible agent of creation. We could think of him as the executive agent of the creation. Without him, nothing was made. God, working through Christ, created everything that is. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. We're going to see in John a correlation of light and life. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. This again correlates very nicely with Genesis 1. The very first thing that God created in a dark and silent universe was light. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And from that empowered universe, God began to create living things to fill his universe. The light came from God. And in exactly the same way, life comes from God. The life of plants and animals, the life of man himself, made explicit in the book of Genesis. So God created man, he actually formed man of the dust of the earth. He took some dirt, made a mud boy, and he reached over there by the riverside and breathed into that mud boy the breath of life, and he became a living being. Life comes from God, and that life is the light of the world, the light of men. Uh, this is profound, and there's a great deal going on here that we could plumb, but you can see the beginnings of it. The philosophical questions, what exactly is life and what exactly is light? Those are both scientific questions, and scientists really can't give us a good answer to this. Why are things alive rather than not alive? The scientists can't tell you. They've got some guesses. Non-Christian scientists have got all kinds of guesses. Maybe it's crystals on the back of original minerals in the Earth's crust. Well, no, not hardly. Living things don't come from non-living things. Life only comes from life. We all know that. There's no such thing as spontaneous generation of life. That's impossible. And the complexity of life requires creation. In him was not merely the physicality of life, but life itself, the spiritual reality of personal animation. Now, that's a spiritual thing, not physical. And it can take on a physical form, but once the physical form goes away, the life doesn't end because life comes from God. So there's something really, really special here. At the same time, the light, light is power. Light is literally a form of energy, and all of the various kinds of energy have a physical presence in the universe. Physicists to this day don't know quite what to do with light. We know the equations for light. Character by the name of Maxwell wrote out the first set of equations for light waves and waves on a pond and sound waves and radio waves and all of that kind of stuff. And light uses the same equations as sound waves or magnetic waves. It's the same stuff. It's energy. And energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only changed in form. When God created light, what he did was to take the energy that has always existed as part of his character and give it a physical form. Life is the same thing. Life is eternal. Life is essentially eternal in God. And what he did in the creation was to give life physical form, life and light. What Jesus is going to do in the incarnation is to take that life and light that are the eternal reality of God himself and give them physical form in a human being. That's the point of the Gospel of John. That's the whole point. And so for these late to the party critics who say that the Gospel of John is making too much of an emphasis on the deity of Christ, dude, the whole point is that God became a man, that the life and light of eternity came into the world through the creation and then through the incarnation. So creation and incarnation are tied together here in the same grand set of themes. It's a beautiful thing. I love the way it works. Verse 5, the light shines in the darkness. The light shines in the darkness. When Jesus came into the world, he shone into that darkness and brought light into the world. And the darkness has not overcome it. The Greek word that's translated overcome here is variously translated. It's a fairly unusual word, and I'm not going to quote the Greek, but it's a fairly unusual word. It usually means to understand or to comprehend a thing. Here it could well mean overcome, but I think understand makes just as much sense. What we are saying here is that the light has shone in the darkness. Those who dwelled in the shadow of death, who were walking in the darkness, have seen a great light. This is Isaiah 9. And here's this great light, and the darkness just doesn't get it. Those who live in the dark, who enjoy the dark, who really don't want any of us understanding anything, really don't want Jesus to shine a light into their dark place. The light would like the darkness to, or the darkness would like it if the light would go away, if somebody could put the light out. And much of the work of the critics of the New Testament is an attempt to turn out the lights. But unfortunately for them, the light and the life are both eternal. God's light doesn't go out. When we finally get to heaven, there'll be nothing but light, no darkness at all. And so there will be no dark places in any of our lives, any of our hearts, and any of the places that we go. Not just the physical sense, but in the spiritual. This first 5 verses is profound. And what John is teaching here is that Jesus is God. He was with God. He is God. He has all the power and authority of God. He carries with him in his hands the very life of God. He is the light of the world, come to shine in the darkness. It's a fascinating thing. It's a great thing. Life and light. Okay, so John goes on. I've got time for a little bit more here. Let's see how much farther we can get. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. Okay, this is somebody else. This is this particular John is not the Apostle John. This is John the Baptist. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came to bear witness about the light. Okay, this is one of my favorite lines. When in years past I have done ordination councils or ordination services in churches, I like to tell people this. The pastor is a man sent from God. He's fully human with all of the faults of every man that was ever born. Your pastor is not perfect. The teachers who come and teach you about the Bible are not perfect. We are all human. What makes a pastor different is that he was sent from God. So here's a man sent from God. He's just a man, yet he has the authority of God. And that's a very strange package because we pastors fall short. We're not perfect, and yet we're sent with a message from God. We have the authority to the extent that we actually preach God's word. To the extent that I am doing exposition of what God has actually said, I count as being a man sent from God. So here's a man with all the warts and shortcomings, sent from God with an authoritative, true message from God. And this man's name was John the Baptist. He came as a witness. The term witness, marturoi, or marturos, we got our word martyr from that. And John, of course, was martyred. He was beheaded by one of the Herods. He came as a witness, to bear witness, to tell the truth, to give honest testimony about the light, which is Jesus, that all might believe through him. Okay, John's intention was that the people of Israel might be convinced that Jesus is the light of the world, the Son of God, and then believe through him. So the response that John was after, the response that John the Baptist was after, was faith on the part of everyone he came in contact with. That was the point of John's baptizing, and we'll talk about that a little later here in this same passage. He was not the light; he came to bear witness. The true light, which is Christ himself, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world. The world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become the children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Okay, this introduces the concept of salvation by faith, justification by faith, which is going to come up again and again and again in the Gospel of John. Those of you who've been through me in Romans know the importance of the sequence here. Faith is an attitude of trust built on a knowledge of the Word of God that results in active obedience to God. Okay? John chooses to emphasize the third part of that message, the active obedience. When we believe in Jesus, stuff happens, things happen, life is transformed, communities are transformed, people are helped, the truth is believed and applied to life, good things happen. But John goes on and he's hinting at some of the rest that is going on here. We're going to get to chapter 3 eventually. It'll most likely not be for a while yet, but at the rate we're going, those who were born, not of blood or of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man. What's that? Well, born the usual way is of blood and the will of the flesh and the will of a man. Okay, mommy and daddy make babies, and babies are born in the usual way with a whole lot of screaming and bleeding and all of the rest of it, and it's all a very physical thing. I love babies. I think babies are great, and I'm kind of glad we don't have too many around this house too often anymore, because they're a lot of work when you get to be our age. But babies are wonderful. And John is not talking here about the birth of babies. He's saying, who were born not of blood or the will of the flesh or the will of men, but of God. So there is a second birth. The Greek word is anagonao. Over in the third chapter, Jesus is going to have a conversation with Nicodemus that we're going to spend a lot of time with. We call it what do we call it? We call it that's some kind of discourse. I'm going to call it the Nicodemus conversation for now, the Nicodemus discourse, in which Jesus says, don't you know, you being a teacher of Israel and all, that in order to see the kingdom of heaven, you must be born again. And Nicodemus is saying, oh, you mean born the usual way, blood and the will of the flesh and the will of it? No, Nick, you're not catching it. That's the other kind. To be born again means to be born from above, to be born of the Spirit, to be born of God. The new birth, what we call technically regeneration, is by the power of God, by the direct action of God's Holy Spirit. The spiritually dead individual takes on new life in which he becomes a child of God. Okay? To all who receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. What John was out in the wilderness looking for was individuals who were willing to become the children of God, who were willing to believe. And that believing was the first symptom of the new birth. In Romans, I showed you the illustration of dead Fred. The first thing that happens is the Holy Spirit's work. Regeneration happens. And then faith and repentance happen, and on the basis of that, God justifies us. So justification by faith, and faith as the first symptom of the new birth, are all tied up in the message of the Gospel of John. I might get through this first section. Let's give it a try. And the Word became flesh. The Word, the eternal second person of the triune God, became flesh. Flesh is the flesh and blood, this mortal body that we have. The idea that God became a man is central to John's message. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That is, he took up residence among us. He pitched his tent here, literally tabernacled, and we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. There's a whole lot going on there. I want to emphasize the glory here. We've shown in the Old Testament that the glory of God is the visible manifestation of the invisible character and attribute of God. And so the heavens declare the glory of God. We learn something about God by looking at the sky and the animals and stuff. In Israel, God revealed himself in the fire and smoke on the mountain. He revealed himself in a bright light in the tabernacle for Moses. He revealed himself in the Shekinah glory that continued to live in the temple. In the New Testament, Jesus is the glory of God. He is personally, in the flesh, the visible manifestation of the invisible character and attributes of God. But this concept continues. For the believer is also to carry in him the character and attributes of Christ himself. What did Paul say in Colossians? This mystery hidden from all the ages past, now revealed to us, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth for his own glory. Sin marred the image of God. The image of God is the glory of God, but it's a marred glory, a marred image. Jesus came to redeem man from sin and thus restore the glory of God in redeemed men. We have seen his glory, the glory as of the only Son of the Father, full of grace, which is the resources to accomplish everything God has for the believer, and truth, which is the infinite foundation of everything that can be understood about reality. Then he goes on, and John, which is John the Baptist, bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me. For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made him known." Okay, a lot going on there. No one has ever seen God because God is invisible. Later on, we're going to see Jesus talking to the Samaritan woman. Jesus is going to say the same thing again. God is a spirit. Nobody ever has seen God. The only God. Isn't that interesting? The monotheles, or monotheos, the single God, who is at the Father's side. Jesus is the only God, who is at the Father's, who is also God, side. He, God the Father, or God the Son, has made him, God the Father, known. John is already building his theology on the concept of the triune Godhead. The three in one. We're going to get to the Spirit in great detail in the Gospel of John. In the Gospel of John, the eternality of the triune God is clearly taught, and also it's clearly taught that this is the point of the Old Testament. When we come back on Wednesday, let's see if I can stop the share here. We're going to launch into the book of signs, and the signs are going to go all the way from 119 through the end of chapter 12. Sequence of signs, a sequence of I ams, with a growing interaction with the Pharisees. The point of the Gospel of John is to demonstrate the evidence for the deity of Christ. This is ultimately what it's about. Okay, I'm going to leave you now. Love you guys. Thank you for your attention. I love it when you when everybody shows up, and I see everybody popping up on the screen. We'll see you again on Wednesday, and we'll probably finish up the first chapter of John on Wednesday. I hope this has been helpful for you. I know that I've enjoyed it very much. So
Thank you.
bye-bye now, and God bless. Here comes Donna. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night. Good morning. Bye-bye.
Amen.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.